Alrighty, our last chapter, our last lecture, the last bit before we're done. And it's not the best topic, but we got to cover it. I mean, you're going into the medical field. A lot of you're going to be dealing with death and dying. So we don't want to leave it out. It is an important stage in life. So we're not going to do an exhaustive, discussion of the topic. Of course, it's such a big thing and deserves lots and lots of attention. And it's interesting because it used to not get any attention in the medical field at all. It was seen as a failure. And medical schools didn't have a lot of training in the whole end-of-life dying process. But now things have changed a little bit thanks to a woman named Elisabeth Kubler-Ross. She was, around a while back. And she just thought that the way that the medical world, she was in the medical world. I don't remember if she was a nurse or a doctor, or a psychiatrist. But she saw that the way that the medical field treated patients who were dying was wrong. She felt that it was absolutely wrong. They just pushed them to the side and ignored them. And she instead wanted to focus on those people and talk to them and find out information about them and treat them. And so she was the first thanatologist, which is somebody who studies death and dying. So she was the first one. She got lots of attention for it, of course, and, protested and lobbied to have the medical world treat end of life differently. And so you'll see her in the notes, but we've kind of covered some of her stuff. So, alrighty. So chapter 20, the last chapter, is about death and dying, which right there, the topic is difficult because in current times now, we have so many ways to keep you alive and to treat you, to prolong life, that we're now sometimes in a position of having to make a decision of whether you should die or not, which is strange. Before we had all this medical advances, we're not going to make that choice at all. We fight to save a life, but my computer screen went quiet. But, there's only so much we could do. But now we've got all these machines and medicine and stuff that we can just keep you going. And then it becomes a decision having to be made on somebody's part. And that's a really difficult situation to be in. It brings up all kinds of ethical issues. It brings up relationship stuff, family stuff. It just makes everything very complicated. So, yay that we can keep people alive, but at the same time, wow, and what that brings, double-edged sword. So it's also complicated. We don't know when you're dead now. What is death? Some people think that it's when your brain isn't functioning, when you're non-responsive. Others may say, well, it's when your heart doesn't work anymore. Others may, it's a different term now. And there are lots of different kinds of death. We're not going to talk about that, but your book talks about, so it's interesting to see social death, biological death. So it's kind of neat to look into those if you want. So there's different ways to define death now, and people will have different opinions. And, there you got that decision to be made, and it's a family member decision, and different family members have different opinions on if the person is dead or not. So that's going to be complicated. Now, I didn't find them. They found me. But there used to be some speakers that would come to my class, and they worked with end-of-life care, hospice kind of thing. One was a nurse, and one was a religious minister, preacher kind of person. And they had this organization that helped families prepare for end-of-life, not the physical stuff, not the hospice care with the pain regulation and medical procedures, but the family psychologically deal with death. And they were largely advocates and educators. And that's why they wanted to come to our class and speak, because they knew that nursing people were going to be working in this field, but also because just the general population wasn't preparing for their own end-of-life care the way they knew they should. They saw what happens when that decision has to be made, when that situation comes up, and the family doesn't agree. There's all kinds of fighting and stress and troubles, and people don't talk to each other afterward. And it can be very, very bad for everyone in the time when everyone's already feeling such high, strong emotion and being such a difficult time. That they said, you should be preparing ahead of time. And the way you do that is by talking about what you want, what should be done. That way everybody knows what to expect. Everybody's on the same page, and the person who wants it is the one stating it. So it's harder for other people to accuse the one decision maker that's been designated as being whatever the other family members might say. So they were really coming around to say, talk about it, make the plans, tell people what you want, let it be heard by everybody. Do it at Thanksgiving, do it at Christmas, do it at birthdays, do it at 4th of July. Do it when everybody's together so that everybody knows what to expect. So that was their push for it. But, in America, we deny everything. We are death deniers. We don't say the word dead. We don't say dying. We say passed on. We've got these other nicer words for it. We don't like to talk about it. We keep away from it as much as possible. We hire people to come deal with our dead family members' bodies. We hire strangers to go through the whole process. We put makeup on the body. We put clothing and drew their hair to try to avoid any resemblance or any reminder of what's actually happening. It used to be in our culture, and currently in some other cultures, the person who died stays in the house for a while. Not now. We scurry them off as fast as possible. It's what we know to do, so that's what we do. So they talk about that America, we avoid and deny death, and that actually makes the experience worse for everyone. We're not aware of what happens when a body dies. We're not very familiar with it. So if we happen to be around it when it happens, it can be disturbing. And, when we don't know what to expect and we don't know what's happening, it makes us feel a lot more anxious. So it's good to have knowledge and be aware. And that's what hospice does for us. I'm kind of jumping around the notes. Because we have these medical advances, we often prolong the dying experience and make it more painful because we can keep you going. And it's often a very lonely experience because it's happening in a hospital. We don't do it at home very much. Everybody usually says they want that. They want to be home, but that's not where the majority of us are going to die. We're going to die in a hospital. And geez, I think about with the virus stuff going on right now, how people are not allowed to visit those in the hospital. Ugh, that's terrible. But we either get too much medical care so that it prolongs us and keeps dragging us on, and we end up in pain with all the new treatments, or we don't get enough. And when we don't get enough, we were talking about like pain medicine. Doctors may be worried, oh, you'll become addicted. But studies show that if you control how much pain medicine you get yourself, you actually use less than what they give you. So research doesn't hold up to that belief that you'll become addicted. So we either do too much or not enough a lot of times. So hospice came around to try to help the end of life for everyone, for the dying person, for the family members and friends of the dying person. That's what it's made for. It's made to help this process go as comfortably and as psychologically easy as possible. It wants to help death and dying be as pain-free as possible and as humane for everyone. So it's a new idea. I'm glad we are around in the time and day where we have such services, but they're very expensive. And that's something that's a problem, and there's criteria that have to be met in order to be able to qualify for hospice, and that often kicks people out. So the speakers that came were frustrated because people's attitudes towards death and dying are such that it often prevents us from meeting some of the criteria that are necessary for hospice. We don't want to accept it, and that's number one. You have to accept the fact that the person is dying, the patient themselves and the family members. if people are in denial about what's happening, then hospice can't work because they're there to help you go through it. They can't help you go through it if you don't think anything's happening. Look at my wild hair. So, yeah, everybody has to accept. And that's hard to get to, right? And so that sometimes is one reason that kicks people out and they don't get a chance to have hospice services. So the other thing that has to happen is death has to be predicted within 6 months. And that's hard to say. A lot of times doctors don't want to make that prediction. Sometimes people get in hospice because they meet that criteria and then they get out because they haven't died within the 6-month time frame. So a lot of doctors are hesitant to give that 6-month time frame, and so they can't get the hospice then for that reason. And some places they don't have hospice available. So that's another problem. Their most important goal is to control pain. And if we have pain controlled, we often have a better experience. We're healthier and have more energy. So pain is a big deal. I'm looking at the notes because I'm jumping around a little bit. So we talked about how needing to know what, I talked about those speakers coming in and saying that knowing ahead of time is valuable for all the family members so that there's no fighting and arguing and everybody understands what's going to happen or what the person wants. And then everybody can be on the same page. Well, there's something called a living will. And that's where you specifically write down while you're cognizant and aware what you want to have done, whether it's kind of life-sustaining procedures you want or what the funeral is going to be like or services. I mean, it can be all of that. But a living will spells out what everybody's to do. So that can be very helpful for the family members who have to make that decision. And there's a decision tree that we go down. There's people that if someone's not designated, the state bases it on your relationship with the dying person. And they go to spouse first. And if there's not a spouse, they'll go to oldest child and next child. And so it may end up being somebody you don't want to make those decisions. So if you don't designate somebody to make those decisions, then you may not like the outcome. So that's another reason to have a living will. And sometimes people say, well, I don't know what's going to happen. There's just too many variables. I don't know what it's going to be like at the end of my life. So instead of specifically saying, I want this and I want that, maybe I'm just going to appoint somebody to make those decisions. Now, they know what my general thoughts are and preferences are, but they're going to make the decisions instead of me spelling it out in detail right now. That's like a power of attorney. They give them the medical rights and the power to make the decisions. And again, that's all fine if everybody knows what the decisions are. But if the dying person doesn't share that with everyone, then you're going to have some family members disagree with what the decision maker is doing. And, that's going to cause that decision maker all kinds of stress and problems on top of what they're already dealing with. So talking to everybody, they said, is very, very important. All right. So I think we got 2 more things, but I'm going to do it up here. Okay. So I do have in the notes about euthanasia, because the whole dying process can be traumatic and upsetting. And because we know a lot about certain diseases, if someone knows that they have a terminal diagnosis and they can see what their future looks like, they may want to end it early and avoid those end stages, which they understand from statistics to be very unpleasant and not something they want to experience. So euthanasia, we know that with animals. We've talked about that word before with animals, right? Not in this class, but you've heard it before. But it's trying to make an easy death, trying to prevent, the suffering that may be coming. So we have active euthanasia, which is where you do something on purpose to end somebody's life, like administer drugs that are going to kill them. And, you know, my stepfather killed himself in October this year, and it was because of the medical condition that he was in. He has been having heart problems for many years and developed some other kinds of medical problems. And he kept having to go into the hospital and get his lungs drained and his chest cavity drained and stay there for a couple days and then gets back out and then goes back in. And he decided that he just didn't want to go through that again. And he started feeling badly again, knowing that that's what was going to happen. And he decided he didn't want to feel that way anymore, and he shot himself. Now, a lot of people don't think of that as active euthanasia. They may think of that as suicide, and that's fine. Doesn't matter what it's called. But that was the point. The point was to prevent, you know, the future bad prognosis that he had, and he just didn't want to keep going through that. So that's active, but, you know, it can be done by a doctor in some states. Some states it's legal. By a spouse. It's intentional cause of death to avoid the bad experience. Then there's passive euthanasia, and we're probably more familiar with that one, and that's the decision to withhold life-sustaining procedures. So that's where, you know, you have a DNR, do not resuscitate. It's not really euthanasia, but it's, I don't want anything done. It's when you remove the feeding tube and the ventilator from somebody who's being kept alive by these things. It was interesting, one of the times that my speakers came, they came, it was many years ago. It wasn't right after the Terri Schiavo case, but it was, closer to it. Most of you probably don't even know what I'm talking about with that name. There was I might get some of the details wrong, but there was a woman in Florida who had been kept alive with life support for many, many years in a feeding tube. I think mainly she had a feeding tube. She didn't respond to people for like 10 years in the hospital or in the nursing home. And finally, I believe it was her husband decided, let's end this. Let's pull the plug. Let's stop feeding her. And her parents, I believe it was her parents fighting it. They didn't want to do it. And it went to the courts because, he's the one. And it made national news. And the thing that everybody was concerned about, all the lay people and the parents, was that what a painful way to die from starvation, from removing her feeding tube. But what our speakers said, who have been trained to work medically with people in that stage of life, said that when people are at that end stage, they often have measurements taken of input and output, what they're taking in and what's coming out. And when they do, they find that what goes in often comes right back out, and the same amount, so that they're not really using the food and water that they're taking in. And they say that people don't feel hungry. I don't know how really they can decide that, but that people don't feel hungry at the end stage of life. So this idea that removing the feeding tube was going to make them feel the pain that you and I feel when we're hungry. And I'm hungry right now. But that pain, then that sounds terrible. Starve someone to death. How horrible. They can't get up and get anything to eat. They can't even tell you that they're hungry and in pain. But they were saying, no, that's not really the experience people have. But you know what? We don't know these things as the general public because we don't study death and dying. It's something we're all going to go through, and we don't know anything about it. Bizarre. We know about babies and birthing babies and menstrual periods and puberty and graying hair. I mean, we know some of these biological processes we talk about, but not dying. And they talk about how Americans are just so far removed. We don't want to have anything to do with it. So, it's interesting. Okay. We mentioned Kubler-Ross before. I'm looking at the notes. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she was the one who started saying we need to pay attention to these dying patients and treat them in their state, not to keep them alive, but to help them die nicely, easily, as little pain as possible, and give them respect. So she went to these patients who were given the prognosis of death, imminent death, but were kind of ignored by the medical world. And she interviewed them. And she found that there are some common stages they went through once they had their diagnosis. So this is only applying to people who've been diagnosed with something and, been told it's terminal and know that they're going to die from it. It's not going to apply to people in car accidents or anything. So this is knowing your own death is imminent. Okay. She found that they commonly went through stages. The first stage was denial. And that is the whole, not me, you got it wrong, get a second, third, fourth opinion. I'm not going to get treated for it. I think there's a mistake made. It can't be true. Denial. The second stage, the next phase they went through was anger. Why me? Why this? Why is that person allowed to live and I can't? Why is this happening? This isn't fair. Then bargaining, which is, well, just let me live till Christmas. If I can only make it this, if I stop smoking, maybe I can live longer. It's an attempt to control, have some say and control over the timing and process. Then depression. And depression, they say she believed, was when they really first understood that there wasn't anything they could do about it. It was going to happen to them. And so it's the first real accepting stage. But it's depression and sadness. And then the last stage, some people made it too, some didn't. And she said, don't try to put people through the stages. Don't try to encourage the stages. This is just what commonly happened, was acceptance. And acceptance is where they're no longer angry. They're no longer depressed. They're just understand it's going to happen and they live out until it does. This may sound familiar to you. It may sound like experiences you've had, the stages you've gone through when somebody else died, or you had a major loss. And that's what they think it can be generalized to, is just loss, period. The reaction that we have to loss of our own job, loss of other family members, loss of a love relationship. It's the stages of loss and grief. So it can be applied in other areas. The last bit of notes for death and dying, I usually show a video in class, but I have it on a tape. I don't have it online. Is our attitudes towards death and dying. We've already said that we're deniers, but as we go through our developmental stages in life, we tend to see death and dying in similar ways, in very kind of age or developmental consistent ways. So little kids, you'll notice little kids are not scared of death. They're not scared of dead things. They'll go right up to a dead animal. They go right up to a dead person, because we believe that until around age 9, they don't really understand it. So they're not scared of it. They're not upset by it. If they get upset, it's largely because they see their parents upset or their family members upset. So they're just kind of mimicking that feeling and seeing their sadness. But up until 9, Up until 9, they often believe that it's person died because they did something bad. It's not going to happen to everyone. It's just people who do bad things. I mean, we've told them, don't run out on that road. You'll get hit by a car. You'll be killed. So we're mad at them. So we're telling them they're doing bad things and we punish them. So they think that if you do bad stuff, you die. And if you don't do bad stuff, you won't die. So the person who dies is being punished. They did something wrong. What did they do wrong? And before age 9, they also don't think that it'll happen to everyone, just like I said. But they don't think that it's permanent. So they might think that grandpa's going to wake up, or that if you give them some special food, they'll be okay. Sometimes parents propagate that idea because they'll say things like grandpa went on vacation, went far away, on a trip, went to sleep. And developmentalists say, no. Be honest. Be honest with kids. Explain it as simply as possible, but do not tell them things like grandpa went to sleep, because they might get scared to go to sleep. But after 9, things they start to know that it's universal. It's not just people who are doing bad things. It's part of life, and it's permanent. You can't reverse it. So 9 seems to be around the age. Teenagers, they joke about it. It's so far in the future, it's not going to happen to them. And they believe in, like, they have kind of abstract thinking about it, like what you said they do before. It's some nothingness. It's not a real thing. It's very romantic ideas about it, kind of dramatic. They believe it's not going to happen to them. They operate in that personal fable. And so they end up doing stuff we know is dangerous for themselves, but it doesn't like relate to them. They don't think of it as a serious possibility. Young adults, it's still far away, of course. Accidents are the only thing that's going to happen to us, right? A fluke illness or something, but usually you don't expect that for young adults. If it happens to them and they are diagnosed with a terminal illness, they make the worst, in general, the worst medical patients, because they're very angry. I mean, you can imagine you spent your life waiting to be an adult, preparing to be an adult, looking forward to being on your own and doing all these things in your future, and now you don't have a future. Very, very angry. Makes sense. Middle-aged adults, this is, they think, the first stage and first time in life where they really, really understand that their mortality is imminent. Like, they are going to die. It comes in their face for the first time. Remember, we talked about how they count how many years are left, not how many years are past. So their perspective is different. And so this makes them very fearful of death compared to other ages. They're the most fearful because they know it's coming. Late adults, they've often had lots of experience with death and dying, and their family, their spouse, their friends, and they know that, it's going to happen to them. So a lot of times they're more understanding of it and less fearful, less angry. Now, Erickson said that's really helpful if they have integrity. If they have despair, they might be fighting it because they, aren't happy with how their life went. Maybe they're trying to make changes. But that generally late adults are more accepting, less likely to have unfinished business, things they need to take care of. And so it's often less emotionally painful for them. The last little bit in our notes kind of jumps, but we already said, I think, losing a spouse. I think they said the number one stressor is death of a spouse on that stress rating scale. I don't know. But it's harder on men than women, and we already talked about why that is. Because guesses, it's not so common. It is, they don't have as much social support. They don't have as many friends to help them through it. So we already talked about that. But then communicating with a dying person. A lot of you in the medical field are going to be doing that. And one of the big things that developmentalists say is make sure you talk to them. Don't ignore them. Don't avoid them. Talk to them. Sit on their eye level. Make eye contact. Touch them. Let them talk about whatever they want to talk about. If they want to talk about their death, let them talk about their death. Saying, Grandma, that's not going to happen. Now you're going to be fine. Nope. Not helpful. Not productive for the dying person. You have to be thinking about them. It's painful for you, but developmentalists are saying, come on. It's about them right now, not you. So allowing them to talk about whatever it is they want to talk about. Do not deny it. So I think that's it. I think we covered all the notes. Yup. Looks pretty good. So we're done. Yay.